week, I spent a lot of time talking about the human condition and the evolution of mankind on Earth. I think in passing, I took note of the fact that we are complexly embedded, each one of us, in a variety of systems. There are all the systems of various things happening in our body. There are the systems of our interaction with that ties us to the physical world and what's happening in the physical world. And there's certainly a lot of human interaction systems with friends, family, work relationships, the general public, all kinds of systems that involve the lives of other human beings in which we are intertwined. Uh, and we need to understand and appreciate that. One of my biggest gripes with my own discipline is that we have been captured by what we facetiously call the medical model. The the theory is that psychologists are part of the medical system. We deliver what's called mental health services, and those services are medical in nature and they deserve health insurance reimbursement rituals, and they're to be controlled by the same kinds of rules and regulations that physicians have to live by. And the short version of that is it involves giving a diagnosis and then finding the correct interventions to kind of fix the deficits that are given by the title of the diagnosis. That treats the human organism as if it's a self-contained thing. What we're treating is this person, but the truth of the matter is, as I noted, the person is embedded in all kinds of systems. And the misery the person is experiencing may have nothing to do with brain secretions or a variety of other things that are within his body. They may have to do with turbulence in one or another or several of the systems in which he or she is embedded. And that model does not allow for concern with those kinds of issues. So, today I'm going to talk about one of the biggest systemic challenges that any human will embrace. That is the decision to remain single or to search for a life partner. That's a very common and recurring dilemma in all cultures. People face that dilemma. I don't know if there's any culture that's based upon nobody will ever get married in this culture. I don't think such a culture exists on the face of the earth. But within every culture that does exist, at some point or another, people are confronted with the issue of are they to embrace the system of marriage? Many cultures practically demand that. There's no other cherished destination for anybody other than getting married. Anybody who doesn't get married is either sick, deviant, strange in some way, immoral, terrible, all kinds of opprobrium is put on not marrying, and people are punished in subtle or overt ways for their unwillingness to marry. In the cutting edge Western technological societies, marriage rates are falling. As we move on and develop new ways of thinking about life, fewer and fewer older people in this, people who reach age in this culture are marrying. The rate is now down below 50%. And that's something I can speculate about, or maybe even in what I'm going to read you, there are some speculations about that. But be that as it may, it's not so obvious in this culture that that's the preferred destination for anybody, or whether not getting married should be stigmatized. Uh, and there are great generation gaps in that. If you have grandparents and are currently a young adult, you'll get nagged over and over again by the grandparents because they believe you should be married, and that is their template. But it's not necessarily your template if you're just reaching adulthood. Be that as it may, I have written about this issue. That's not the total focus of the issue, but I've written about it with the story of my interaction with one of the people I knew growing up. And here it goes. The title of the chapter from my book is called Mouthing Off to a Friend. I had known James for about 15 years when the incident I am about to describe took place. The interval of our knowing each other began at the time the two of us were in our middle 20s and went on through the moments I am remembering, a time we were when we were on one side or another of our 40th birthdays. I'm not exactly certain I remember which side, but we were about 40. During our long interlude of shared companionate moments, there was a very important difference in how we were embedded in our respective lives. As was so true for most of the members of my age cohort, I had married in my early 20s, and half of my peers by that time had already done the same thing. And by the early 30s, almost all the rest had come to marry. That was the expected destination for young adults in my generation. Unfortunately, after adopting two children and after many years of marriage, my agonizing, wrong-headed first marriage had at last ended by my later 30s. I was then blessed to discover my precious present wife, and I was in the early stages of knitting together a proper, sustaining, and wonderful union and a step family. James had kept me company through the dying years of my first marriage and on into the promise of a new life with a much better partner. During all that time, James had remained single. Across the sweep of his own young adulthood and on into the beginning of his middle years, James had continued to live in a fashion my mother would have described as being, quote, a perennial bachelor, close quotes. He was reasonably affluent, healthy, witty, had what were considered excellent, quote, good looks, unquote, could be quite charming, and appear gallant, responsive, and caring to any woman meeting him for the first time. But he had never coupled seriously with any of them. He cried out increasingly often and with rising bitterness over the years that his life was cursed. He simply could not meet the right woman. It was so frustrating to him, or so he said. He claimed to be inordinately miserable that he was still single. James dated extensively. On the surface, at least, he did not appear shy or unavailable. He would get caught up in the whirlwind of infatuation frequently, calling me or telling me in person what a wonderful new companion he had met. He would be excited to bring her around to his friends, myself included, so they could see what good fortune had befallen him at last. But after a period of time, he would make a forlorn announcement that fate had teased and tormented him yet again. He would relate so disconsolately that he discovered after an interval of time spent together that his then current companion had a flaw or flaws that were just fatal to his making a life with her. And with a good deal of anguished disappointment, he would separate from the female in question. During his early and on into his middle adulthood, the episodes of infatuation in which James spent exploring what might be possible with some new fling could last for a few days, for a few weeks, or even for several months. But there was always the same, quote, disappointing, unquote, end. The object of his desire wasn't right for him. The discovered defects of his potential beloved ranged from trivial physical characteristics, I can't keep looking at that mole on her back, to what he found to be annoying personality traits. She doesn't have my sense of humor, or she's a neat freak, or she's trying to dominate me, or she needs to fight with me too much, or to simple human differences. She doesn't want to go backpacking, or she doesn't know anything about investments, and she doesn't seem terribly interested in learning, or she's too involved with her friends. James never took a chance on living with any of the women he was trying out, and he certainly never became engaged to any of them. The best for which any of his affair partners could hope was that he would tell them that he was serious about them and would make and keep a pledge of sexual exclusivity and fidelity, at least for a while. Still, in the end, he always bailed, most often leaving the then current woman bereft, confused, and not infrequently angry. I had met many of the transitorially adored. Most were decent persons. Some were admirable. Others were even exceptional. I often muttered to myself that my acquaintance was such a chicken shit fool. And there was sometimes pain for me when visiting with James. It was a pain that became particularly familiar to me in the dying days of my first marriage, when I could have cried tears of frustration at my envy and my desire to be the one who would go on and become and go home with some woman seated by James' side. On the evening I am remembering as I compose these sentences, my own new precious Hermine was going to be occupied for the evening. I went after work to have a few drinks with James. He had just separated yet again from his latest companion. We had martinis. I had two. He had three in quick succession and became quite lugubrious in exactly the same fashion as had become his unvarying practice. Quote, I just don't know why I have to be tortured this way. God must have it in for me. Maybe I was some kind of evil fuck in another life, and this is my punishment. Sarah seems so wonderful. She's beautiful, vivacious, fun loving, so very, very kind and appreciative. And she's a hell of an attorney. She made partner at her firm at a very young age, but it just doesn't work. She doesn't know how to give good head. I keep trying to teach her, but she can't seem to learn. Just another case of things not working out. That's something that's so critical to happiness between a man and a woman, don't you think? But she fails miserably. I cried when I told her that I didn't see how it'd ever be right between us. I tried to make it easy for her. I said that she was a great gal and I hope she finds someone who would love her as she deserves to be loved. But when am I going to find that special one? I need to get with it soon. I've always wanted to marry. I want to be a father. I can't believe by rotten fate. After all these years and two martinis, I had had it. I simply could no longer tolerate James' ridiculous construal of his circumstances. I had become filled up to the overflowing. Oh, for God's sakes, will you stop lying to yourself and you're lying to your women and lying to the rest of us? You're never going to get married. Just admit it to yourself. I've watched wonderful women come and go out of your life. Any number of them would have made exceptional wives for you. But you don't want the realness of marriage. You get off on infatuation. Yes, it's just a wonderful drug, better than heroin. That's it. You're an infatuation junkie, and that's okay. It's your life, and there's no correct way for any of us to tell you that you must live. Do with yourself as you please, but do it openly and without duplicity. Just tell yourself, and I beg of you, tell the next woman whom you invite into your life that you can only thrive on the aphrodisiac of romance. You can't do without it. You'd rather be alone than settle for ordinary affection and respect. So you'll just go on climbing aboard the exhilarating roller coaster that'll start as soon as you and the next appealing woman discover each other, and you'll keep riding the rails of infatuation until it gentles down. And it will, it always does. And then you'll have to begin to visit the mundane, the disappointing, and the irritating. That's what marriage contains, a variety of opportunities to find the hidden beauty in the mundane, the irritating, and the disappointing, as well as to enjoy the wonderful things a partnership can provide that you haven't even given yourself any chance to discover. But you won't do that work, and you're probably too frightened to let anyone matter that much to you. And do you know there are enough wonderful women out there who are your mirror image, women who themselves shun any attachment that might become permanent. You can find a plethora, an overabundance of similarly inclined females willing to be in your life, more than big enough supply for the entire rest of your days. And you wouldn't have to pretend to that portion of women who will show up that you want domesticity and that you're eager to be invested in it too. You aren't at all interested in settling down. And I see no signs you're ever going to be willing to accept about 70% of what you want and to know that that would be a good enough fit for any prospective wife of yours. And beyond that 70%, you would have to embrace the limits of what's real, then learn to struggle, to problem solving, to negotiate, to compromise, and to do all the other work necessary to be able to suck joy and goodness out of a vital and enduring real partnership. You want your epitaph to read, he was cursed because he never found the woman of his dreams. But you refuse to learn that you can only find the woman of your dreams in your own masturbation fantasies. She doesn't exist in real life. If I'm around to provide an epitaph for you, it will be different. It will be, he loved getting off on the joy of infatuation that always accompanies the exploration of an ever new and ever expanding number of appealing possible companions. And then he was excellent at discovering the imperfections of each he found, and he comforted himself with his false beliefs about why he could never make a life with any particular one. So he lived his years devouring what he believed to be the most delicious appetizers, came away ever hungry, and never learned to eat a square, nourishing meal. Why on earth had I teed off on poor James that way? I'm usually not that unkind. Well, that evening I was not only overflowing with moralistic annoyance at what I clearly come to see as the duplicity with which James lived his life, I was also aware of the contrast he was exhibiting between his plight and my good fortune and hard work, beginning to make a new marriage. And as I had been absorbing his lament, I had also been reviewing in my mind a myriad of experiences I was gaining as I was listening to an increasing number of clients struggling to find and to sustain good relationships. All of this had been steadily altering and illuminating my understanding of the plight of my drinking companion and the dilemmas we all face. It can be no surprise if I write that much of the time I've spent in my office over the years I've been in practice has been spent with clients hurting as a result of some painful turbulence flowing from the nature of their relationships or non relationships with other humans. Some are like James, wallowing in pretense. Some are lonely because they have an insufficiency of human warmth in their existence. Some have been badly wounded along the path of life and find it hard not to keep revisiting and brooding about the scenes of their wounding. Some are trapped in present poisonous relationships and have neither the will nor the skill to be able to transform or to leave those relationships. Some are following the cultural project of, quote, looking for a life partner, close quotes. Or at least, as you shall soon see, they are insisting to themselves that such is the case, and then are feeling distressed like James because they cannot find, quote, the right one, close quotes. And some fail over and over again to maintain effective and sustaining human connection because they are clueless about how to manage the creation of what is possible with anyone who shows up in their lives and might, in fact, be a reasonable person with whom to spend some ongoing time. There are a variety of different factors that can create relationship incompetency, emptiness, or turbulence, but that's a whole other book entirely. I shall only observe here that when I was in graduate school, I started with great personal urgency to reflect about the search for what is required to sustain supportive intimacy. Became preoccupied with the issue because my own early marriage was becoming increasingly painful, even unbearable. And of course, because some of the coursework to which I was being exposed had contents that were providing me much food for thought. For example, I remember being in a quote, introduction to clinical psychology, close quotes, class with E. Lowell Kelly, one of the founders of my profession and a giant in the field I wanted to enter. In an idle moment and related to no particular topic of his lecture that I can remember, Professor Kelly made a whimsical aside in his remarks to us, an aside whose words have stuck with me over more than 60 years. Quote, well, in essence, we humans are social animals, pack animals, and by nature we are bent towards a need for warmth and connectedness with others. So it's quite simple. There are two kinds of human beings. There are those for whom the longing for love is enormous. It is so great that those endowed will walk on hot coals, run any risk, try to attain love over and over again, even though they may have to put up with endless hurts and disappointments. Even if bloodied, they will persist if in the end they believe there might be a shred of possibility that their efforts can secure love. Then there are the others, those among us whose disappointments and hurts have crushed any such hope. All they want is to be cautious, to remain safe, to make sure they can minimize any suffering that might be inflicted on them at the hands of others. The latter sequester themselves, keep their relationship superficial, and try as much as they can to create hermit like existences. Early in my practice, though, I came to the conclusion that Professor Kelly was partly onto something, but was also oversimplifying an important fact of human life that was much more complex than his two kinds of people metaphor. Yes, we are indeed social beings and must have human interaction to sustain us. The good feeling that comes from being cherished is as important to the nourishment of our souls as food is to the nourishment of our bodies. But at birth, we enter the world in a state of exceptional helplessness and vulnerability. And then for many years, longer than any other living organism, we are dependent upon and hypersensitive to both the ministrations and blunders of others who care for us. A certain minimum quantum of good parenting is critical for our unfolding development and for our ability to reach independence with the capacity to regulate our own lives reasonably well. Most of us are fortunate enough to receive at least the minimal caring necessary for us to grow up. But no one has perfect parents. No one makes the journey from birth to autonomy without some wounding. We are all subjected to some episodes of neglect, cruelty, incompetence at parenting, misunderstandings, lack of empathy, exploitation, seductions, cruel or foolish punishments, demand to learn principles for living that are ill-considered and or lead to self-handicapping, rigid scripting of what we are to become. And these are only some of the examples of harmful interactions between parents and children. But we are also the recipients of nurturance, soothing, kindness, caring, compassion, protection, support, wisdom, and validation of our right to be ourselves as well. For too many humans, though, their primary and ongoing early experiences are mainly drawn from the former, the dark group. For those more fortunate, their primary streams of experiencing are composed mainly of the kinds of experiences with others that foster sturdy development. So we adults, contrary to Professor Kelly's simplistic duality, actually can be placed on a continuum. I would certainly agree that all of us do hunger for human belonging and warmth, and all of us are ambivalent about it and at the same time fear an array of unpleasant or even the terrible consequences that can be inflicted on us when we live out a vulnerable willingness to build close attachments. At one extreme side of the spectrum, then, are those Kelly said will run great risk to do almost anything if they believe love can result. And at the other extremes are those wounded by their years of preparation for life, so wounded that they are willing to embrace loneliness if they can avoid closeness successfully and keep around them walls of protection from others. But most of us take up some position closer to the midpoint of the continuum, a position that expresses for each of us at least a partial desire to be open, to embrace, and to bond with others, but mixed with an intermittent withdrawal from others, and are engaging in various kinds of self protective maneuvers designed to keep distance and to minimize vulnerability. During the early years of my career, I also began to learn but for those of us who live in this nation, the challenges of creating and supporting intimate closeness with others is complicated because we are raised immersed in certain cultural teachings that fill us with myths that confuse us. The Greeks had three terms for different kinds of human warmth: eros for the yearning for sexual union, philia for an appreciation of and a respect for the personhood of the other and the wonderful benefits that flow to both persons by their mutual participation in that relationship, and agape, a caring that arises because it is based upon the commitment of a selfless decision. It entails the altruistic choice to seek someone else's well-being proactively, even if there's uncertain or unknown prospects of reciprocation or benefit. Unfortunately, in our culture, we are not practiced in identifying our thoughts and feelings in such ways. We conflate what the Greeks clearly saw as separate and other important forms of caring and responsiveness as well into the single word love, and thereby confuse ourselves and the others with whom I interact. I will address this more fully below. But we have not only lost the wisdom of the Greeks, an array of beliefs about relationships that we absorb in our modern culture creates real difficulties for us in building, understanding, and managing human connections. First, our dominant culture still teaches that for those reaching adulthood, one of the most important exemplars defining having achieved a proper maturity is the willingness and a readiness to enter into the institution of marriage. All who grow up are indeed expected to embrace marriage, and those who do not do so are stigmatized and treated as if their behavior of remaining single is a sign of serious mental aberration, of secret homosexuality, or at minimum, at least represents a kind of stunted deviant development or eccentricity that ought to be overcome. This continuing belief about, quote, the importance of getting married, close quote, is a good example of a phenomenon that the cultural anthropologists referred to as cultural lag. Sometimes what is changing and how a particular culture is organized is not recognized by its members for quite a long time. Anthropologists have long noted that in a time of rapid cultural change, it often takes the passing of 3 or 4 generations before the consciousness of the culture's members and the values they embrace come to catch up with and come into congruous with how existences are actually being structured as the lives of the members of the culture evolves. So let me take note of what are the statistics in this nation. We are so busy worrying about what ought to be that we have failed to look at what is. I have mentioned this earlier, so here's what it is. At this point in time, more adult Americans are living unpaired than are engaged in a willingness to join with a significant other. Just as birth rates are also declining, so the general willingness among the populace to build a lifelong partnership with a fellow human being has just kept decaying year by year for a large time now. Yet most of us ignore this very significant cultural change and behave as if we are continuing to expect marriage from the members of each oncoming generation. We act dismayed, almost scolding, with individuals who do not marry. Given how we continue to stigmatize single life for those of marrying age, here in the 21st century, it would take a lot of courage and a great deal of integrity for any of us to announce something like, I'm not interested in marrying. The institution doesn't suit me. I'll have friends when I want some company. I can and will have some others when I need some sexual companionship. but I want my own residence, my own space, my own solitude, and I don't want to have to be constantly burdened with the needs, the responsiveness, the commentary, and the lamentations of another human being all the time. James certainly lacked the courage to announce any such thing, and I wound up clumsily chastising him for that. I also have had a chance to reflect a great deal more about how terribly we have conflated so much into that one word, love. In our culture, we have been and are continuing to create generations of men who find it overwhelmingly difficult to say, I love you. The announcement has come to mean to men, if I say I love you, it means I am going to marry you. And so marrying, I'm also making a lifelong commitment to you. In addition, I'm going to be faithful to you and forswear loving anyone else for the rest of my life, except perhaps children we have. And men dread saying I love you because each feels that unless he is ready enthusiastically to embrace all parts of these avowals, he cannot properly and fully speak of love. But the elements we erroneously merge together are totally severable. One can love and not marry. One can marry and not love. One can marry, love, and not enact fidelity. The high divorce rates in this country reveal too that only a minority of our marriages last for a span of a lifetime. In addition to these complexities, I believe we ought to do even better than did the Greeks and create an English vocabulary that more aptly captures the complexity of the array of possible bonds that grow between humans as we create them in the modern era. Even the English translation of the three different words, concepts the Greeks use are not sufficient to capture the diversity of connections between two people as we are currently constructing these connections. Here are the most problematic terms used frequently in this culture to label the nature of the two forms of possible human relatedness we establish and pursue. Falling in love, quote unquote, or quote, being smitten, unquote. This is the sudden, glorious, joyous rush of anticipation on meeting a certain stranger whose appearance and manner on first encounter stir a racing heart, sweaty palms, yearning in the loins, great approach avoidance, ambivalence, a sense that we may be in the presence of the one who is waiting to embrace us perfectly. It is such a wonderful human experience. Everyone should have at least 17 such infatuations over a lifetime. When in the grip of the state, life seems radiant and joyous, if not absolutely perfect. Yet, for reasons I am about to specify, I prefer to call this state infatuation and not love. Or sometimes I even use the word employed by various sociologists, limerence. In the state of infatuation is always based on unreality. The person being seen by the infatuated observer is in the greatest part as yet unknown to that observer. During that some enchanted evening when we meet a stranger, to paraphrase from a song from South Pacific, we are only aware at first of certain surface properties easily observed: appearance, carriage, sound of voice, movements, vocabulary, style of dress, matters that could be readily apprehended in the first few minutes of the encounter. With the continuing experience of the otherness of the other, however, infatuation is doomed. We begin to see what we had not glimpsed at first: disappointing features, irritating features, even dismaying ones. And then conflicts and misunderstandings also begin. If we are unlikely, in fact, the bubble of infatuation is popped as soon as the other begins to speak. If we are more fortunate, it can last some days or even weeks. The record among clients I have seen has actually been about 3.5 years, but infatuation always ends, and it can never be the basis on which some more enduring union might be established. Love proper, that's my term. As any pair meets and one, another, both of them then begin to experience the decay of infatuation, a choice opens between them to move apart from each other which was James' preference, or to begin to undertake serious work to create a union based not on infatuation, but on love. Achieving love is not a beginning, it is a destination at which some can arrive, but only after overcoming great challenges. The enterprise is a difficult one. The work requires transparency, vulnerability, and a tolerance for finding pathways through frustration. Few do it well. The decision not to move apart as the wreckage of infatuation becomes apparent, the decision to make the attempt to achieve love, may well have to start with what is a fairly simple assessment. It goes something like this. On the balance, being with name of possible partner is good in many ways, but she is deficient in name of characteristics, excessively about name other characteristics, and maddening about name still other characteristics. Yet does she provide me with 60 to 70% of what would be good in a partner to have by my side as I move through life. On the balance, is my life better because she exists and we're able to be together than I am when I am without her or him? Am I willing to discuss everything frankly and begin to make the attempt to see whether name of possible partner is flexible? I'll have to reveal my pettiness and my own limitations if we pursue such a conversation or many conversations. Maybe I owe it to both of us to make a serious attempt to overcome what divides us, not knowing whether I will succeed or fail. I don't know how flexible he or she is. I don't know how much he or she is willing or able to modify what I'd like to be different. And part of the reason I'm in this dilemma now is that I become aware of some wounds he or she brings to our interaction. Am I willing to try to be creative and to help him or her to heal those wounds? Can I make a difference? Am I willing to put my life on the line, be courageous, expose all my concerns, talk about everything, and strive for everything without knowing what the outcome will be? Maybe I should begin the process, do it in good faith, test what's possible, and get some sense of whether or not we could begin to build something solid and more sustaining. If the answer to the question of whether to be to part or whether the chance proceeding comes to be yes after this assessment and testing period goes on, then an enormous amount of interpersonal work has to next be done. The nature of that work is a book in and of itself. But here is only a partial list of some of the human dilemmas that will have to be addressed and at least partially resolved between the two before any partnership could be well constructed. Learning to address and resolve conflict thoughtfully and respectfully. Managing differences in values and beliefs. Bringing inevitable disparities in universal human needs into some mutually tolerable conformity. Balancing productivity, intimacy, erotic unions, and taking solitude alongside of a partner for whom preferred balance in each will always be devilishly at war with each other. Daring to reveal everything and to hold back nothing from one stream of consciousness with one's partner. Developing working rituals for decision making. Who makes the final decisions about what kinds of contents that may be in dispute when both cannot come to consensus? Negotiating a non-exploitative distribution of the responsibilities for the various support activities that must be done to make lives possible. Learning to exist in and be responsible for caretaking a shared common space. Developing a plan for coping with and structuring the nature of relationships with others, relatives, friends, colleagues, and eventually children who might be created. Fashioning rituals for the use of precious leisure time. Melding finances and agreeing to a shared budget. Unfortunately, those who do seek a sustaining partnership have had little or no education on how to address most of the topics I've just set out. Whatever wisdom has been accumulated by the two risking the building of a partnership Most often that wisdom has come from committing earlier blunders blindly and perhaps learning something from them or not. The rest has been gained by observing the behavior of others, either in real life, in the media, in motion pictures, or novels. And for a large number of us, a sufficiency of good role models has not been available. I should have added a good and real role models has not been available. In addition to a growing unwillingness to enter into marriage on the part of those who compose our culture, there is a further reason that the institution is in trouble. Most who marry have failed to do the work of preparation I sketched above. Instead, they hold a wedding that is really a party without real substance. For much, if not most of the matters the pair will have to address are still waiting to be discovered and still needing a successful resolution. And my life experiences and my work have convinced me that a wedding ceremony only has the proper substance if the two who are being honored have met, have survived the collapse of infatuation, have gone on to discover and to build love based on knowing the realness of the other, have created adjustments, compromises, and understandings for a huge number of misalignments between the two of them, have kindness for the limitations of their partner, have together dealt effectively with the other human beings who are part of their clans, are fully functioning as individuals in their own right, needing nothing from the other to complete them, are wanting to be with the other because life is more glorious with them, and are able to speak about anything and everything with their partner. Marriage should be a celebration of the hard, intense, and glorious work two people have done with each other, their having arrived at supportive ways to be with each other together, and their desire to participate in a public ritual that is a public recognition of what is a special human triumph that they have achieved. It is a tragedy that so many continue to marry because they are supposed to. It is a tragedy that so many continue to marry while being clueless about what they are attempting to create and how the challenges might be mastered. It is a tragedy that so many marry knowing so many painful difficulties still exist, but believe that there is either a potential for something better or that has been agonizing will magically go away once the marriage party has been held. I close my memories of my encounter with James and the musing it has stirred in me by asserting that for many, maybe most, marriage is not a necessary destination upon reaching the era of maturity. It is a challenge. It is an acquired taste. And if anyone is interested in its possibilities, I want to write that the hard work does not end when the partnership has been reasonably well crafted. As does any garden, it requires ongoing maintenance and periodic heavy lifting and challenging effort. I once said to Hermine, being with you is my second full-time career. For me, it is worth the effort for both of my careers. Being a psychologist and being a married man feel like marvelous challenges and intense cauldrons in which growth and change are ongoing. And I can find wisdom if I keep showing up and embracing the difficult and often painful complexities of both. And thank you for listening. And we're a little early today because that was shorter than my ordinary lecture. So I'm willing to open up and hear comments. My God, I packed a lot into a few pages.
Arthur, I thought that that always I agree with the concept of a continuum, and I thought in some ways on the other side of the continuum was the fear of intimacy, and I like your kind of concept of a port of intimacy. But I'm reminded of a client that I had many years ago. And I think that kind of like what he wanted to do was to feel more comfortable in terms of dating and going out and his attempt at coupling. And then after a period of time, I had realized, and he was a kind of like an interesting guy. He was, I think he had a a fairly high position at UCLA, and he was, I think he may have had a master's degree, and he would walk to work, and I'd always see him as I was driving to the office. I'd see him walking, to work from West LA,
Oh my
and
God.
he loved to walk where all the time, and he also loved hockey. He would go with a bunch of friends to hockey games, and he was a big hockey fan. And it came to me, and I don't know if this was more of a kind of a therapeutic epiphany, that in some ways that his struggle to couple was, kind of like became my struggle to help him. But I felt in some ways that I actually needed to help him to feel good about being alone and being by himself. And that seemed to kind of like ease him into kind of like his life, and kind of like him being who he was, rather than trying to kind of like push him or prod him or look into kind
Yeah.
of like his fear of intimacy.
Yeah.
So
Thank you. You said something really dear, and it's a mantra I mutter. I know you hear it from me in group occasionally. Change begins with an acceptance of what is. So you were telling him, don't race ahead and try to be different. Let's settle in and see what we can learn about the joys and beauty of separateness, and how you can make your own separateness some kind of garden that's better to live in than it is right now.
yes, and I was reminded after I stopped working with him, I was reminded of kind of like just that concept, because I would see him walking, down
And he was
Wilshire
all alone, I
Boulevard.
assume,
Yeah.
on those walks.
Oh yeah, yeah. But he was very determined, because in
He
some ways
didn't join a hiking club as a
I
means to.
I don't know. Hmm. Yeah. He had a group of friends. He had good friends.
No, he
Uh,
may have had acquaintances. I don't know how much of his soul he was willing to share with his friends. I call those people acquaintances, the people we do things with, we go to movies with, and
okay. Yeah. All right.
yeah, we go on
Yeah.
a vacation with, and we talk about things out there. We talk about politics and all kinds of stuff, but never the things that are hurting our heart.
Mm.
I wonder if he ever talked to any of those friends about how shy and uncomfortable he feels when he tries to date somebody.
These were his hockey friends.
His hockey friends. You can talk about hockey statistics. You can talk about the prospects for teams. There are all kinds of topics you can talk about with your hockey friends.
Mm.
Hmm.
I really like the how you pointed out that maybe people are 60% compatible. That there's a
Yeah.
lot of things that don't work in relationships. I'm a little more generous. I tell them that they might get 75.
Oh, you are a really cheerful optimist.
Yeah, I don't know if I
Maybe I'm
go.
cynical because those people don't show up in my office. Maybe that's what the problem is.
Mm.
Maybe.
Mm.
They certainly have been members of my family.
Yeah, I think with the abundance of the apparent abundance of choice given by modern technological dating, that the myth of the magical other is very alive. This idea that there's somebody out there who's going to be just right.
Yeah, look at all the thousands of people who signed up with the dating app. I just have to keep sorting through them.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'll find the one. I love that phrase, the one.
Yeah, yeah.
There's an infinite number of possible partners, each of which will aggravate the shit out of you in some way, and all the ways will be different.
You just have to choose your aggravation.
Choose your pain.
I think there's a quote by you somewhere that having a partner is learning to love their flaws, to
Yes,
cherish their wounds.
yes,
Mm.
to see if you can be helpful and overcoming them.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. That always brings back a terrible memory to me. It's
You're welcome.
Terrible one.
one of the sticks that fell on the fire that finally became a bonfire, and I separated. I went into mourning for my dead father when I was 24 years old. I think I told you guys this before. My audience hasn't heard it. I had turned off all my feeling states the day he died. I had become a mechanical robot walking through life. And that gradually started to thaw when I reached my early 20s. And I began to feel more grown up, more competent, more resilient, sturdier than I had when I was much smaller. So it became safe to think about my father's death and to feel the horror of it and even to cry about it occasionally. And on that day was the anniversary of my father's death. It was January 13th. I can even tell you the year. 49, 53. It was the year, it was January 13th, 1954. I was in my second year of graduate school. I had a paper due. I was looking in my book calendar to see how much time I had to do the paper, and then I saw today was January 13th, 1954, and I just started crying. I suddenly felt the wave of sadness. I was back at the funeral, attending his funeral, where I was mute and just standing there like as a frozen soldier. And freezing was right. It was January 13th in Western Pennsylvania. It was really cold out, and there was snow all around. And I was freezing to death. Ugh. So there I am crying. And while I'm crying, my former wife walks in and she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm sorry, I'm crying. I'm feeling sad because today's the anniversary of my father's death." "You crying? I can't stand to see a man cry," she said. She turned around and walked out.
Oh,
She had no sympathy for that wound. She had no sympathy for the fact that that wound tormented me, nor any desire to be kind, helpful in any way. That was grounds for rejecting me that I had that wound.
Mm.
yeah, touch incompatible with you.
Now,
There's-
some wounds are bad, like if your partner needs to strangle animals, I don't think that would be a worthwhile wound trying to struggle with.
Yeah.
But if they're anxiety ridden or get frightened very easily, then that's a very worthwhile thing. They've certainly been overwhelmed with terror of various kinds growing up, and everything represents a possible disaster. I like working with clients for whom that's a problem, and I don't think I'd mind being married to somebody. It can get tedious because they can become quite draining sometimes, over and over again. They're in a panic, but
Mm.
nevertheless, it's noble work and worth doing and worth attempting.
Yeah.
Anything else at the moment? Thank you for listening, as always.
All right.
All
And
right.
I will be back next week. I found to my horror, well, I'll go up on, I'll create the agenda. I found to my horror that one of the favorite books on my shelf is missing. And I think now I may have lent it to a client some years ago, never gotten it back. I always have a principle. I'm not going to lend my books, and then I violate it over and over again. Well, this book is very special. You'll hear about it next week because Amazon had an old copy and I ordered it. I hope it will come here by next week. If not, I'll talk about something else and I'll have it by the following week. The title of the book is The Naked Therapist.
Mm.
And the edit, it's a collection of essays put together by Sheldon Kopp. Sheldon
Mm.
Kopp was the guy who wrote, "If you meet Buddha on the road, kill him."
Yep.
So,
Yep.
so he is interested in all kinds of quirky. He was interested in all kinds of
Yeah.
quirky projects. He wanted to get, I forgot how many chapters there are, maybe as many as 12. He wanted to get some 12 therapists whose names were recognizable. Nobody famous agreed to show up, but I was semi-known because I had been important in APA. My name was known out there. I published some papers that were known, and all the others also. And what he asked us to do, based on my suggestion I had made to him, because I had run a symposium on this topic, what he asked us to do was give us an accounting of the worst, terrible therapeutic failures we had ever made. That's what The Naked Therapist is about. Each of those chapters is about a humongous fuck up by somebody. And my chapter is there. And God almighty, my attitude, I'll be repeating some of this next week, as my attitude about what's there changed over the years. When I first wrote it, I wrote it in a rush of joyousness. While the outcome wasn't what I wanted, I thought my wisdom, my brilliance, my attempt to do something creative and worthwhile, it just shines on the pages of that book. And I was proud of what I was trying to do, even though I failed. I remember who I showed it to, and that'll be part of my story. Then it got published, and over the years, I used to distribute copies of that to some of the classes I was teaching. Again, as a proud example of what a therapist can do, even when a therapist failed. And starting about 15 years ago, for some reason, I looked at it again and I was appalled. I was horrible. I was cruel to the client. I was I was so busy demonstrating how creative and brilliant I wasn't listening to her. And I believe I actually harmed her and made her life even more miserable than when she had started to come to see me. So it really is an example of terrible therapeutic failure. And I am not proud of it anymore. I will tell it with a great feeling of shame and humiliation about what I'm exposing.
I think that that's a great topic for your presentation at the next LACPA convention, Arthur.
Ay, you want me to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
you want me to be the naked therapist?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can cite others as well, but
Yeah.
I think that'd be great.
Oh, yeah. Would take a lot of courage. Also, I don't know if it qualify. I have to come up with at least 5 references of empirically validated things that are relevant to what I'm talking about. I have to meet APA guidelines for
Wow.
what qualifies as a presentation. Oh, I'd
Worthwhile
love to.
hearing.
I'd love to make the keynote speech on that topic. I don't think you get CE credit for attending the keynote offering.
Oh, probably. I'm
think-
sure you do. Oh, yeah,
Do you?
absolutely. 100%. Yeah,
Same
yeah,
problem.
yeah.
It'd be
I don't
better
know.
if they didn't.
You're stirring the Star Trek part of me to go where no man has gone before.
There we go. All right.
Maybe I should stir up the courage. If I was willing to put that nakedness in a book that got published, I don't know how many copies got sold, but and to
Mhm.
present it at a symposium that people presented. Well, I was proud of it then. Even though the
Yeah.
outcome wasn't good, I was proud of the work, and I hate the work. It is a primer on what not to do. That's what the work is at this point. Maybe that's useful. I'm sure it's useful to
Oh,
go.
it'd be tremendously useful.
But I don't think anybody's doing the kind of idiocy that I was doing then.
There's
They're
all
doing
kinds
a
of new
different
types
kind
of
of idiocy.
Yeah, exactly. Brand new, fresh idiocy is available now.
All right, thank you for your thoughtfulness. That was wonderful.
Okay.
On
All
that
right.
note, I'll say goodbye.
All right. Have a good weekend. Okay.
Bye.
Bye now.
See ya.